2024 was a crazy year for horror movies. We had movies like Longlegs, Alien Romulus, and The Substance, which absolutely dominated the year. But one of the most hyped and most recent horror movies to come out of 2024 was Nosferatu, a remake of the original 1922 adaptation directed by none other than Robert Eggers. When I heard about this movie back when it was announced, I was extremely hyped for it, especially after learning that Eggers was going to be the one directing it, and I just think that there was absolutely no better choice than him to direct this movie. If you don't know who Robert Eggers is, he is a film director who's directed movies such as The Witch, The Lighthouse, The Northman, and of course most recently, Nosferatu. Personally, Eggers is like by far one of my most, if not my absolute favorite directors in Hollywood right now. I've been basically a fan of his since The Lighthouse back in 2019, and I'm glad to say that I've watched both The Northman and Nosferatu in theaters. And the reason why I like Eggers so much as a director is just the stuff that he does with the horror genre is unlike anything that's being done right now. He has this particular style which just seems like can't be replicated by other directors. Like when you watch a Robert Eggers movie, you just know that it's a Robert Eggers movie just from its style. And what's so special about his take on horror is how he integrates elements such as historical folk tales and mythology as a main part of his movies' narratives, not just as a thematic or a stylistic backdrop, which in my opinion just completely elevates the experience of his movies even more. And this obviously counts for Nosferatu. So now that I've finally watched the movie, it's safe to say that this movie absolutely did deliver on its hype and expectations, and it actually ended up being one of the best horror movies of that year. And the reason why I'm making this video, other than to review Nosferatu, is to just basically take a look back at Robert Eggers' movies and see his evolution as a director and how it led him to make Nosferatu. To be honest, I actually watched this movie quite recently. I watched it right before I watched Nosferatu, actually, because it was the only Eggers movie that I hadn't watched up till then. So I watched it literally the day before I watched Nosferatu, so it's still quite fresh in my mind. This movie came out in 2015, which was, wow, that is 10 years ago now, and stars Anya Taylor-Joy in this historical family melodrama set in 1630s New England. A brief summary of the plot is essentially about this family who was banished from their plantation village and went off to live in a secluded house with a small farm surrounded by the woods. Sounds like a great plan, right? That is until Thomasin, Anya Taylor-Joy's character, plays the absolute worst game of peekaboo with her youngest brother, and this happens. The baby was basically abducted by a witch living in the woods nearby, who quite literally turns the baby into strawberry jam and just starts flying. The family then starts experiencing very strange occurrences after they get a creepy black goat and quickly realize that they've been basically cursed by witchcraft. Without spoiling too much, the rest of the movie is basically the family being subjected to things such as demonic possessions as this curse gets worse. If I had to describe this movie in 2 words, it would be that it is hauntingly beautiful. This movie is just pure Robert Eggers through and through. Like, this movie just radiates his style. It's a movie which is extremely rooted in 17th century New England folktales and culture, and actually has been praised for its historical accuracy. From the way the characters dress to the way they talk, it's almost as if like you feel transported into this era when you're watching The Witch. A really cool thing about this movie, which might be opinion based, but it has this very ominous presence throughout the entire runtime, in which you can almost feel like the curse that this family is enduring is on you. And this actually is helped by the fact that the witch herself was barely seen throughout the movie, which is quite surprising, to be honest. I mean, she only shows up in like only 3 scenes in total, and there's no jump scares other than the one time where she just starts laughing. But her seemingly lacking presence makes the experience even scarier, in my opinion, because it feels like she's constantly stalking this family like a predator stalking its prey, making that eerie and ominous presence felt even more. There's a cool take about the witch herself, actually, that basically says that The witch is actually not a literal physical witch, but rather a manifestation of this family's fears and guilt. It presents this fear of the unknown, in which what is supposed to be a normal, harmless forest literally manifests itself into its own character, especially during scenes when the characters are walking through it. The Witch really prides itself in discussing the various themes throughout the movie, which seems it's very confident in, such as the religious theme, especially the extremist side of religion that this family have their entire lives wrapped around, actually plays a role in how this family deals with certain situations, as they literally see their fears manifested right before their eyes. And the fact that this family is also totally isolated from everybody else severely impacts their physical and mental state, as they become increasingly more paranoid and anxious as this movie goes on. The cinematography for this movie is absolutely mesmerizing. Eggers has always been a very visually imposing director, and you can really see that in this movie. Some of the shots and camera movements really impose this sense of dread and claustrophobia on this family, and the use of mostly natural light, especially during the candlelit night scenes, create a very authentic and almost warm atmosphere. Other than that, the performances are just impeccable, like Anya Taylor-Joy, Ralph Ineson, and the rest of the cast. Hell, even Black Phillip do such an amazing job at portraying their characters. And the fact that these people also had to speak like Old English and make it sound convincing makes it even more impressive. The dynamic of the characters themselves are also very interesting, especially when you see how different this family treats each other individually within the same home. Like, the mom absolutely hates Thomason throughout the entire movie, where she literally ends up trying to kill her at the end, while on the other hand, she really loves and cares for her sons especially. Overall, it's a very intense and unpredictable movie with twists and turns at every corner, which ultimately leads to a very beautiful yet mysterious ending. Honestly, I can't even believe that I hadn't watched this film sooner than I did, because to be honest, I think it's actually one of my absolute favorites from Eggers and just features some of his overall best work. I absolutely love The Lighthouse. I adore this movie. It was the movie which introduced me to Eggers years ago, and I personally still believe is his best film yet. The setting of this movie is actually quite similar to that in The Witch, where it is set in 19th century New England, and the plot is basically about Robert Pattinson's character, Winslow, who is tasked to take care of this random lighthouse in the middle of nowhere with Willem Dafoe. Honestly, who wouldn't want that job, to be honest? And that's basically it for the narrative of The Lighthouse. It's actually really simple, because then for the rest of it, it's just these two guys losing their absolute minds as the days go on. But what enhances the movie's plot and makes it actually interesting is the symbolism that is present throughout and actually evolves with the characters. The film also consists of a lot of Greek mythology references, which is actually applied to the characters themselves. And of course, the main symbol of the movie being the lighthouse itself, where it almost seems like it's this forbidden shrine which possesses a hidden secret and power. And at the very end, when Winslow, Robert's character, interacts with this lighthouse, is just harrowing and beautiful at the same time. The film, of course, explores themes such as isolation and the descent to madness of these two guys who are stranded in the middle of nowhere, and you can see how that affects them mentally. It also ties into the theme of man versus nature, where while Winslow and Wake are struggling within themselves, they're also trying to endure the really harsh weather conditions that's constantly hitting them. Just like The Witch, The Lighthouse also prides itself in creating this detailed recreation of 19th century New England sea life, with accurate costumes, dialogue, as well as the overall sea life which was present at the time. This is further emphasized through the use of sea shanties, which are sung in the movie, and the various superstitions and rituals that normal sailors used to do. What makes The Lighthouse such a fun and amazing watch, in my opinion, is simply just watching Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe interact with each other. These two have such a great chemistry between each other and an electric dynamic that they literally glue your eyes to the screen. They bounce off of each other extremely well and both hold up great for themselves. I mean, some of these interactions are just so iconic that they have literally become full-blown memes just by how good and funny they are.
Fortnite.
Every scene with them is just absolutely magnetic, and no second is wasted with these two. And their performance obviously enhances their characters themselves and their arcs and what they're going through, especially Winslow's. Throughout the film, Winslow struggles a lot with repressed sexual desires, as can be seen by the many weird sexual scenes involving a mermaid. This further causes Winslow to spiral down into insanity, which causes him to end up where he did at the end. Wake, on the other hand, is much more of an ambiguous character. We don't know much about him compared to Winslow, rather, Wake is much more of an enigmatic character. He has this mysterious nature to him which almost makes him seen as inhuman. He's a very dominating character who has his upper hand on Winslow, especially when it comes to the nautical life and experience, and also since he's the one who constantly brings up the Greek mythology and superstitions. Visually, The Lighthouse is as impressive as The Witch, but it does some stuff differently this time around. A lot of it actually has to do with paying homage to old, early movies. A black and white monochromatic palette is used rather than the normal color, which automatically makes the movie feel old. This actually allows for a lot of different play with the lighting in the movie, because the movie literally constantly goes back and forth between having harsh light and shadows, which creates some really interesting visuals. The 1.19 by 1 aspect ratio gives this square and boxy feel and just is used basically to create this really claustrophobic environment, which could not be achieved had they used a normal 16 by 9 ratio. Overall, I mean, The Lighthouse is just a very great and fun movie to watch, although it's quite insane, which in my opinion just combines everything that makes Robert Eggers movies so great in my opinion. Moving on to The Northman, which is actually probably his most different by far. This time, the setting moves away from New England, but rather focuses on 10th century Iceland in what is basically a Norse epic. The plot of The Northman is basically about Amleth, who runs away from his home village after his uncle kills his father and takes his mother for his own. After a couple years, we see an older Amleth, who basically makes it his life goal to seek revenge against his uncle, to avenge his father and save his mother back. If you haven't noticed yet, this story is actually inspired by the popular play written by Shakespeare called Hamlet. The Northman is essentially a very loose adaptation of the play, as it introduces a lot of Norse mythologies to it, but it places the story elsewhere. But even though the setting and the story of The Northman is quite different from what Eggers usually does, he still found a way to interweave what he does best into this, mostly having to do with the Norse mythology. The mythology is actually a main part of this movie's narrative, and to be honest, I think this is the movie which is most rooted into the mythology, and as it literally serves as a driving force for Amleth in his heroic journey, and how that parallels mythological heroes in sagas. Throughout the movie, we can see Amleth being aided by this mythological and spiritual guidance, where visions, prophecies, and the idea of fate and being aided by the gods actually shape Amleth's path forward. There are also uses of symbolism in the form of animals, which are usual representations of Norse gods, including ravens and wolves, which also show a display of primal instincts. And there are points where Amleth himself literally fights typical Norse creatures such as a draugr. Just like we've seen with The Witch and The Lighthouse, it was fully expected that Eggers would show a huge amount of respect towards Old Norse and Viking culture. This time, Eggers paid great attention to detail in portraying an accurate depiction of old Viking rituals, battles, and daily life. Mixing all of this in with the mythological elements creates this fantastical yet at the same time realistic world which combines the beliefs and life of Old Norse civilization. What's also so great about this depiction, in my opinion, is that Eggers doesn't really glorify or romanticize the Viking culture that much, like what a lot of other Viking media would usually show. Rather, Eggers chooses to portray the side of Viking culture which is dark, cold, dirty, and brutal. He also doesn't shy away from showing the ideals that these Vikings had when it came to honor and masculinity, on how the Viking code of honor instilled these societal expectations on men in this violent world. And obviously, since the film's plot is essentially based on a revenge story, it does such a great job at showing the devastating effects of revenge, with the theme of the cycle of violence being portrayed as a never-ending cycle which has devastating consequences for everyone involved. Visually, the Northman makes use of a lot of large shots of Icelandic landscapes to show the vastness of it, as well as the harsh beauty and coldness of this world. Eggers also makes use of one-shot takes this time, like during the first raid scene, which really immerse the audience in these intense action sequences and really make you feel like you're in the action itself, rather than having quick cuts which makes the whole thing sort of superficial. There's also a cool interplay with the lighting when it comes to contrasting the natural lighting of the real world of Iceland with the very vibrant and surreal lighting of the mythological dream world sequences. Of course, the sound design in this movie is produced in a way to reflect this Viking culture, with the score mainly consisting of percussion-heavy music, which gives off this very primal and raw vibe which captures the Viking life. As you might tell, production-wise, this is by far Eggers' biggest production he's ever made. The sheer scale of this movie is just huge, and Eggers really did what is, in my opinion, a really great job at showing how vast this world is. It was definitely his most ambitious project yet, where he actually talked about how he found The Northman to be his most challenging movie yet, stating that the leap in scale from his previous movies, which were quite small, over to this one, which is quite large, proved to be very difficult as it was not something that he was usually used to, and it was the first time that he had worked on a film with this large of a scale. As you might tell, the recent outing from Eggers was by far his most hyped and most anticipated yet from all of his filmography. Most of the hype for Nosferatu mostly stemmed from the fact that the 1922 classic was going to be readapted by Eggers himself. And since a lot of people are now familiar with his style, they were very eager, including me, to see how Eggers would take on this classic tale using his iconic style. For some context, this movie was set out to be a remake of the original 1922 movie Nosferatu: A Symphony of Horror, which back then was an adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula. But this Nosferatu version had changed so much stuff from the movie that Bram Stoker's widow actually sued the movie, and the court gave an order to destroy every copy of Nosferatu. Of course, they didn't manage to destroy every single copy because we wouldn't be getting this remake today. The story of Nosferatu is basically about a newlywed couple, Thomas and Ellen Hutter, set in 19th century Germany, in which Thomas, the husband, works for an estate agency and is hired by his boss to go meet Count Orlok up in Transylvania, who Orlok basically wants to buy an abandoned house in the town of Wisburg. Hutter then makes his way to Transylvania, meets Orlok, and he discovers that he is this demonic, rat-like creature who makes him sign a contract so Ellen could be his. After that, Orlok and Thomas return back to Wisburg, where now Orlok sets his eyes on Ellen, where they have this sort of spiritual and mental connection, until Ellen decides that the only way to defeat Orlok is to sacrifice herself. So that is essentially the plot of Nosferatu, and fortunately enough, the new remake pays a great homage to this 1922 movie, with literal scenes being bar for bar the exact same, which was really great to see on screen. I mean, it was clear that Robert Eggers wasn't set out to make a version of Nosferatu which is supposed to be better or try to one-up the 1922 version or try to rewrite it, but rather to pay great respect to what came before and to what nowadays one of the most influential horror movies ever made. I mean, hell, even visually for the majority of the film, the remake has this very desaturated look, which isn't completely black and white, but desaturated in a way which looks like it had the life sucked out of it, kind of like how Orlok sucks the life and blood out of his victims. It also really goes back to paying respect to the German expressionism that the original was known for, as well as paying his respects to the black and white silent nature of old films. The first half of the movie is by far the most faithful to the original, as it's literally almost a bar-for-bar recreation of it. It almost has the exact same story, with almost the exact same scenes, lines, shots, everything. But the second half of the story, however, which is when Orlok and Thomas arrive back at Visburg, it takes a little bit more liberties than the original and actually lingers on for a while. This is obviously mostly to allow for more dialogue and fleshed out character development. But however, in my opinion, there were some scenes in the second half which did feel a little bit dragged out, but it eventually led to a very satisfying and beautiful finale. Of course, there were some changes from the original, especially when it came to the characters themselves. Since the 1922 original was basically a silent film with literally zero spoken dialogue, we couldn't really get much from the characters themselves, so there wasn't much nuance to them. However, nowadays, now that we have audio in film, this film was able to give all the characters complex arcs, as well as making them feel as real as possible. For example, Ellen, who is the main protagonist of the story, feels much more complex and nuanced this time around. Ellen is a very troubled character, especially since she has this spiritual and mental connection to Orlok, and she is constantly troubled by what she is going through the entire movie. She literally undergoes several mental episodes, almost like demonic possessions, due to her connection with Orlok. And this relationship between Ellen and Orlok is by far the most interesting aspect of this movie, where we literally see Ellen trying to resist her inner deep urges for Orlok, but at the same time she feels like she can't resist him and that she belongs to him. It's also the relationship between Ellen and Thomas which helps her arrive at the decision of sacrificing herself. Their relationship creates a very large contrast between Ellen and Orlok's, where with Ellen and Thomas, it's a relationship based on pure love rather than pure lust, like it is with Orlok. Ellen urges to see Thomas again after he leaves for Transylvania, and on the other hand, Thomas's only goal in Transylvania was to go back to Ellen. Even when he is saved by the Orthodox nuns, the first thought that he has is Ellen. Thomas basically acts as this huge supporting character for Ellen, where rather than shunning her for having these sexual urges for another person, he literally stood by her whatever she was going through till the end. It's a show of how the love between these two persists, even with the presence of a really dark force like Orlok standing in the way between them. Orlok's presence itself is actually quite menacing in this movie. Rather than being portrayed simply as like a tall, creepy, rodent-like creature like in previous adaptations, including the original, this time he is more of kind of like a ghost, like a phantom figure, where he seems so terrifying that at times he doesn't even look real. Rather, Orlok seems like this supernatural type figure roaming around without a soul. And this obviously is elevated by Bill Skarsgård's impeccable performance as Orlok, who went beyond his depths by literally sacrificing his own voice to bring it an entire octave down. Skarsgård has always been known for being this kind of very transformative type actor. You can see him when he literally transformed himself into Pennywise for It. But he just completely outdoes himself as Orlok for Nosferatu. And I mean, even in brightly lit scenes, you just cannot tell that it is him underneath all that makeup. Overall, Eggers' Nosferatu is a worthy adaptation to carry the name, and honestly is worthy to be considered as one of the best vampire movies in the last couple years. It brings in all the best elements from the original Nosferatu movie and spices them up with more mature takes on it, more character development, symbolism, and meaning. So that basically concludes this video right here. We pretty much covered all of Eggers' best films and his entire filmography. And honestly, I can't wait to see what this director has more in store for us. And there definitely is, as he has already confirmed like 3 projects already. A medieval knight film, a werewolf film, and a potential sequel to Labyrinth. Which I don't know if that's true or not, but I'm really excited nonetheless. So anyways, guys, if you watched this video this long, I really appreciate it, because honestly, I didn't really expect this video to be as long as it turned out. This was my first YouTube video, evidently so, and it took me quite some time to make. So yeah, most of you know me from TikTok, where basically I make short film edits, which I just really love, you know, doing edits. It's like honestly like a passion of mine, but I've always wanted to do something like this, something long form, and I'm just really happy that I managed to finally make this video. Of course, I'll be making more videos in the future, hopefully ones which don't take me months as it did for me to make this. But yeah, I'm really thankful for any of you who decided to stick this long and watch. So once again, just a huge thank you. Please make sure, you know, to do the usuals, like, you know, subscribe and like and comment, whatever you like down below. So yeah, see you in the next one. Hey.